Hello and welcome back to The Distracted Gardener. I am Charlie, the Distracted Gardener. I hope whenever you're listening and wherever you're listening from, you are well. Full disclosure with this episode, this is actually the second time that I'm recording it. I recorded it a few days ago, and when I went back to edit it, it sounded as though I had recorded it through a tin can. Apparently, I had forgotten to switch the input over to this Blue Yeti microphone that I'm using here. Today, I did not make the same mistake, and it seems like the audio problem magically fixed itself. So anyway, before we hop into the main subject of today, let's talk about some random updates, I suppose. We had a good couple of days of snow last week here in Fukui. It melted really quickly where we are, but we took a trip to Ono City, which at its lowest is 5 times higher above sea level than where my home is. This is on the 29th. The snow hadn't melted there yet, so we were able to catch some really gorgeous views of the mountains and the castle. You can check out a short blog post on that visit on naturalfukui.com and some other pics from the trip on Instagram at naturalfukui if you are so inclined. As for the garden, well, it's pretty uneventful, I suppose. I did have a delicious salad made up of curly red Russian and dinosaur kales that I pulled out the other day. As for now, I'm just sort of in the planning stages for the spring. I basically got all of my seeds bought and ready, and I'm just waiting, or I thought I was waiting to get them started, but probably I'm going to start some of the longer, the seeds with longer germination times. I'll probably start them out today, things like peppers and whatnot. And I just went out a couple of minutes ago just to sort of check like what the status of everything is. Everything meaning the planters and the planter bags and stuff like that, to see like what kind of cleaning I need to do, because I tend to leave the planters in a very natural state at the end of the season because I want to give, for example, I want to give a space for, what do you call those? Non-nesting. That's not the right way to put it. Non-social wasps, non-social bees and stuff like those solitary bees and stuff. They tend to make their nests in like stalks from different plants. So I tend to just leave it very au naturel until the time comes that I need to be using it. So I have a plan in my head of where things are going to go and what's going to go there. But as I say, I'm going to go through the process of starting to actually seed some stuff out, probably just after I finish recording this. So to get into today's main topic, which is my gardening history. Last week, we had a very data-focused and information-based podcast, so I thought something more of this speed might be kind of a nice change-up. In the episodes titled Growing for the Memory of Others, I talked a little bit about gardening within my family, but I hadn't talked about yet what brought me into the hobby. And I say hobby, but it seems somehow more spiritual seems like the wrong word, but it seems like something close to that, because it has sort of transformed a lot of how I live my life. So I think probably my story is like many others in this age of Corona, but I want to go a little farther back and talk about attempts made when I was a younger and likely more distracted non-gardener, I suppose. Pretty much from the time I went to university, I always had something growing, but it wasn't ever anything more than a basil plant or a flower of some kind on a windowsill. Generally, all of those efforts ended with me forgetting to water the plant for too long and it dying. Later on, after graduating university, when I got my first job out of college, I was living in a house with my girlfriend at the time, and we had a it was a pretty sizable backyard, I suppose, and I decided that I would try to set up a small space for a garden. And I think I spent an hour or so trying to turn over the soil with a shovel when the rockiness of the soil just completely put me off and I gave up. I'm ashamed to say now that I gave up so quickly, and I don't think I grew one thing at that house besides the aforementioned basil plants in the windowsill. I think it's worth mentioning that I've always had a strong interest in nature. I remember staring at this beautiful set of full-color bird encyclopedias. I think my grandfather had passed away I think maybe I was 6 or something like that. And anyway, he had a great interest in nature, and I guess he had this set of encyclopedias. So my grandmother had gifted it to our family after he passed. And as I say, I remember sitting there one Saturday morning. I'd look at one illustration of a bird for a few minutes, draw its picture as best I could using crayons. Crayola, man. Blast from the past. Take the picture to my dad for inspection, and then I'd repeat the process. And thinking about it now, I wonder how different those drawings actually were. If basically they were the same exact picture, just in different colors. But I'm gonna go ahead and assume my father and mother did not keep any of those illustrations. Someday the pain will heal. I joke. It was truly a great grip growing up with fields alternative filled with corn, soybeans, green beans, and other crops, being around my house all the time. And so that was cool because, I got to understand a little bit of where actually our food comes from. And also the family who owned the farms around us was always very generous towards us, and, said, if you ever want some corn or anything else, go ahead and just take it. Just don't take too much, that kind of thing. Greater than that, though, was the gift of forest that surrounded those fields. So basically the setup of our house was we had a very large front yard, a very large backyard. And directly in front of the house was Interstate Route 19, a very busy road. And then directly across from that was basically our closest neighbor, and he had a large yard. And then just beyond that, it was basically all brush and overgrown whatever. And then on the right, left, and back sides of our house, as I said, it was all fields. And then beyond that, you had just woodland. And I spent so many hours wandering through the woods, especially in my angsty teenage years when I just didn't want to be at home, Not that home life was bad thinking about it now, but as a teenager, everything's bad. And yeah, I remember sitting at the kitchen table and looking out onto those fields beyond the backyard and seeing almost not every morning, but often, most mornings even maybe, there would be deer, there'd be turkey, there'd be coyote wandering by. There were woodchucks that lived under our shed. There were families of rabbits that lived under our shed. Occasionally you'd see some possum, or you'd see some raccoons or something like that, So it was very, very much like in the thick of nature, I suppose. Nothing as much as like what a cabin or something like that would have been, I'm sure, but it's just it's hard to imagine who I would be if I weren't raised in such a place. The forests I ran through on the cross country team, the fields, forests, and mini mountains I climbed whenever the mood struck, and my backyard that, as I say, always had so much life in it. And I think because of that, I always felt like I was a part of a much greater web of life, and I kind of knew just to some extent how sort of small I was in the great scheme of things. So anyway, I guess it's no wonder then that so much of my life has been spent as a vegetarian on and off, which I'm in the off phase of that at the moment. I'm for better or for worse, and also campaigning for various environmental causes, and trying through things like this platform to kind of help others see the world as I do, and hopefully get some kind of positive benefit for the world, I suppose, out of it. Jump ahead to 3 years ago, I think, and I guess now would be 4 years. My wife and I had just come back from a Valentine's Day trip to Universal Studios, and then, the news that sent the world into a spiral began to break, and we knew we were going to be spending a lot of time at home, because nobody really knew what Corona was and what it was going to be like, but we knew that we would, you didn't want to be around people too much at that point. And I think around that time, the latest Animal Crossing was going to be released on the Nintendo Switch. And I think we thought, we'll buy that and that will fill our time, which it did. And I'm strangely grateful to Animal Crossing as a kid who didn't grow up with a Nintendo system. However, for me, it wasn't just growing crops in the Animal Crossing world that took up my time, but an increasing interest in doing it for real. At some point in the spring of 2020, I thought, I'm so tired of not being able to buy jalapenos. I've got all the time in the world to grow them, so why don't I just why don't I just go for it, you know? And I think maybe from there, because I searched for how to grow jalapenos on YouTube, the algorithm started suggesting, you know, a ton of videos like Epic Gardening, Daisy Creek Farms with Jag Singh, James Pergioni, who remains the most energetic human being maybe I've ever seen, not just gardener, but human being in general. And anyway, I never stood a chance, you know? And what was supposed to be a single plant of jalapenos quickly expanded. In that first year, as far as I remember, I had jalapenos, I had hawk's claw chilies, snap peas, okra, lettuce, and garlic. And, you know, the bug had bitten really, really badly. From there, it just sort of continued, you know, just watching as much as I could and reading as much as I could. And, you know, I learned how to overwinter a pepper plant. I found the Greenfields Project, a supplier of organic seed here in Japan, and that's sort of basically where I get all of my seed these days as much as possible, and started finding weird pepper and tomato varieties on Mercari, which is Mercari in Japan. And my wife, inspired by my zeal, also briefly got into succulents, although her aloes and cacti quickly became my aloes and cacti and now sit directly behind me, in fact, as I'm recording this episode. My second year of gardening was one of excess. I bought 4 or 5 15-gallon planter bags. What do they call those? Roux pouches, I think, which I love. And in addition to the other sort of planters I had, I think I was up to 20, 25 or 30 by the end of that year. And the veranda, which, by the way, I grow exclusively on a veranda pretty much, was meant to be a spot to hang laundry in the summer, air out futons. You know, in other words, it was meant to be a functional space, but it had turned into a jungle. During that second year, there were, I think I had 4 black beauty tomatoes. I had 2 or 3 atomic purple mini tomatoes. There was okra. There was 4 different varieties of peppers. And I think because of the season, I got to like okra because I didn't really like it before, but my wife loved it. And, you know, it just went off like gangbusters, as they said 100 years ago. And so, you know, we fried it up and we cut it up, mixed it up with pickled plum and sesame oil. And anyway, now I'm a huge fan of this stuff. But anyway, that was the year that showed me how much effort can sustain you. I had frozen peppers, canned tomatoes and sauce, hot sauce, so many dried herbs that sustained me for months. I think maybe I still have some hidden away someplace from that second year, probably. But in a very, very small amount. I think I just forgotten about them. But it was just that year was so fun and so incredibly educational. But also, realistically, it was also insane, and it was definitely too much. It was so much, in fact, that I was an unwitting participant in my own intervention, a kind but firm intervention. Basically, I was told you can guard on the veranda as much as you want, but we have to be able to hang out laundry and the futons without needing to maneuver around giant tomatoes and whatnot. And I think looking back now on that, I think it sort of like broke my heart a little bit. I don't have any land of my own to grow on. Besides, sometimes my wife's grandfather has a plot, and sometimes he lets me grow something on it, but basically, I'm only on the veranda, and I wanted to use every last inch of the veranda, forgetting it just, you know, it wasn't just for me to use. And I think basically when I was told you got to calm it down a little bit, I think I went into sort of like petulant child mode, you know? Well, if I can't use the whole veranda, I don't want to use any of it kind of thing. And so I think that year I didn't end up planting any garlic to harvest the following year. And so anyway, last year, my third year, was definitely not my best. Like I said, I hadn't planted any garlic. I didn't overwinter any jalapenos. I hadn't done any soil maintenance. And needless to say, things didn't grow nearly as well as they had during that second year of abundance. And, you know, it was super discouraging, but thinking about it now, there's also a lot to be learned from it, you know. Particularly in those second and third seasons, I started to get more and more into the science of the thing. If you've listened to the second episode of The Distracted Gardener, you'll know how much I love Merlin Sheldrake's Entangled Life. It was one of the first books I read, and one of the first, when I say first books I read in this world of what would we call it? Botanical science or I don't even know what you want to call it. But anyway, within this realm. And one of the first nonfiction books that hooked me in such a deep way. After reading that and Dr. Susan Simard's Finding the Mother Tree, I wanted to know more and more and more about not only growing things and what sort of nutritional, nutrient, mineral characteristics they had and how to use them. I wanted so much to know about how they grew, why they grew, and also why they didn't. So while this past season, my third season, was a lean one, it was still one of growth. I definitely know a lot more now about soil science and plant nutrition and about how different things grow. And so I have to imagine that it will lead to a much more successful fourth season that'll be starting basically this afternoon, And it's I just related to this. It's weird to think about, like, when I was 18, if somebody was like, "Oh, did you know that based on plant type, like, roots go super far down into the soil, right? Like almost in like a column, or they spread out in like an almost like a flat way, and and they're not very deep into the soil at all." I think like 18-year-old me would have been like, okay, but who cares? I think even like 25-year-old me would have been like, okay, but who cares? Maybe that's saying too much, but anyway, it's a marker of growth, or at the very least change, I suppose would be a better way to put it. There will be a whole episode diving into the specifics of what I'll be growing this season. That'll be out next week or the week after, depending on how I work the episode order. For now, though, my goal with this next season is to cut down on variety of plants and focus on being truly productive in what I do grow. During the spring and summer months, I want to be at least 75% self-sufficient when it comes to vegetables. Of course, the real goal is to get as close to 100% as possible. But not only that, I also want to make sure the garden is a haven for wildlife. It's no secret that wildlife is really taking a beating. To say that the statistics about lost insect populations and the extinction estimates looking over the next few decades of not only insects but birds and mammals, etc., are frightening and sad would be an incredible understatement. It is one of the things that I guess I don't know. I don't know if it's an age thing, but on occasion I think about, I don't know if I want to say this, but anyway, I often think about death at times, and for the most part, it's like, okay, well, I have a very sort of naturalistic, I suppose, or sort of rational mindset about the whole thing. But sometimes it also puts me into kind of like a doom spiral. But also, that's also what's happening as I read more and more about basically, kind of collapse of different ecosystems and stuff like that. But that said, I'm doing my best, and I want to continue to do my best. And I am hoping to encourage other people to do their best to basically be a part of the solution as opposed to being part of the problem, right? So that's what I'm talking about now, providing plants that shelter, feed, house these animals that are having so much trouble. It is a super big goal of mine. And of course, there's a limit here. Again, I'm on a veranda. If my dream comes true and I'm able to buy a plot of land near the base of a mountain or something, of course, the conversation becomes a little bit different. But of course, here, if I start seeing bears hanging out on the veranda, I have to imagine the next time I have an intervention, it's not nearly going to be so kind. So, well, while this means giving up growing space for vegetables and fruit, I think it means the garden this season will be much more beautiful. And as a great bonus, attracting more pollinators will likely mean more successful harvest of things that need pollinating. So yeah, I'm really looking forward to what I hope will be the end result of labors kicking off from today. At that, I think that's where we'll end this week's show. Thank you for indulging me as I look 100% inwards and share my gardening journey. I would very much love to hear about yours. Please get at me with your story over on Instagram or on Twitter at naturalfukui. I'm also going to make a blog post over on naturalfukui.com titled Your Gardening Journey, and I hope you'll fill up the comment sections there with your own stories. I may even want to share those on a future episode of this is not the Natural Fukui podcast, is it? It's the Distracted Gardener podcast. Forgot my own podcast name. Anyway, please let me know about your own journey. Until next week then.